All right, today we're going to dive into a story that completely flips our whole idea of success on its head. It's all about finding some pretty profound wisdom in, well, the most unlikely place imaginable, a historically, legendarily bad baseball team.
I mean, does your life ever feel like this? This constant high-stakes competition? Think about a show like the Korean drama Sky Castle, where getting into the right school or landing that perfect job is literally treated like a life-or-death situation. It's easy for our own lives to start feeling like a game where the stakes are just impossibly high.
But what if the secret to a good life wasn't actually about winning at all? Well, that's the pretty wild idea at the heart of Park Min-kyu's novel, Sammi Superstar's Last Fan Club, which actually looks to one of history's biggest losing teams for answers.
Okay, so who exactly are these unlikely heroes? Let me introduce you to the Sammi Superstars. They were a professional Korean baseball team back in the 80s, and, well, they became famous for one thing, and one thing only: losing a lot.
0.125. Yeah, that was their jaw-dropping winning percentage in their first season back in 1982. Now, just to give you an idea of how wild that is, it means they lost more than 8 out of every 10 games they played. They weren't just kinda bad, they were catastrophically all-time bad.
And this right here just perfectly sums up their outsider status. You have all these other teams choosing these fierce and intimidating mascots: tigers, bears, lions. And the Sammi Superstars? They chose Superman, a lone hero in a league of snarling beasts. You can just tell they were different from the very beginning. So how does the story of this, let's be honest, pretty terrible team connect to our lives? Well, the novel digs into their legacy through a main character whose entire life reflects that crazy societal pressure to win no matter what. He spends his whole life just trying to win the game. So as a kid, he felt totally ashamed to be a fan of the league's worst team. So what does he do? He dedicates his entire life to playing by the rules. He studies like crazy, gets into a top university, lands a great job at a big corporation. He sacrifices his personal life, his friends, everything for his career. And then he gets laid off during the 1997 financial crisis, losing the very game he had given up everything to win. And it's here, right at rock bottom, that everything changes. He bumps into an old friend who gives him this completely new way of looking at the world, a whole philosophy inspired by, you guessed it, their flawed, losing childhood baseball team. This line is really the heart and soul of the whole book. It's a pretty radical idea, right? Stop trying harder and harder and harder in a system that might just be rigged against you from the start. It's about being smart enough to realize when the game itself is the problem.
And let's be super clear here, this isn't about apathy. It's not about just throwing in the towel and giving up on everything. It's an active, conscious decision to stop playing by somebody else's rules. It's about refusing to let your life get squeezed into this narrow, one-size-fits-all definition of what success is supposed to look like.
So this all builds up to the book's really powerful final message. If the game everyone else is playing is broken, then what does it actually mean to win?
The book says that our modern society basically keeps us all running on this giant hamster wheel, and it's powered by 2 emotions. First, there's envy for that tiny elite group at the very top, and second, there's shame for not being one of them. We're basically taught to want what almost nobody can have, and then to feel terrible about ourselves when we fall short.
But this Sammi philosophy, it offers us a way out. It's about challenging that single elite path. Instead of always focusing on what we don't have, we can start finding value in our own lives, in our own worlds. The book suggests that a real victory isn't about climbing someone else's ladder. It's about building your own and living a life that is truly, authentically yours. And so the story leaves us with a pretty powerful question to ask ourselves. We all face these unwinnable games, these pressures and expectations. So what are the unwinnable games you're playing right now? And what could you possibly gain if you just decided to walk away?
Hey, welcome to The Explainer. This is where we break down really big ideas from some pretty fascinating sources. This wasn't just, a bad day at the office. Nope. This was pretty much the philosophy of the Sammi Superstars. They were a real-life Korean pro baseball team back in the 80s, and they basically turned losing into an art form. So how on earth could the worst team in history become a legend? Well, that's exactly the question that Park Min-kyu's novel, The Last Fan Club of the Sammi Superstars, really digs into. It uses this story about baseball to explore something way bigger, the nature of success, failure, and, what it even means to live a meaningful life. So to kick things off, let's get a feel for just how good this team was at losing. Okay, so the novel brings us into the world of a team that didn't just lose. They took it to a whole other level. They turned it into an art form. They perfected defeat in a way that honestly seemed almost intentional.
And get this, it wasn't just a string of bad luck. Their losses were so methodical, so consistent, that it almost felt like they were making a statement. And this is where the novel gets really clever, because it connects this huge public failure to something deeply, deeply personal.
You see, the whole story is told through the eyes of this young kid, a totally devoted fan. And his life, well, it seems to run in perfect parallel with his team's tragic season, almost step for step. So for our narrator, every single arrow on the field, it felt like a personal failure. And when his friends started ditching him, wearing other teams' jackets, man, that felt like a huge betrayal. And this is what so brilliantly sets up the story's central metaphor. Baseball wasn't just a game anymore. It was a mirror, reflecting the entire world that was changing around him. To really get what's going on in this story, you've got to understand the world it's set in. We're talking about South Korea in the 1980s, and this was a time of just massive, intense social change. So the arrival of professional baseball wasn't just about sports. It actually mirrored this huge cultural shift. All of a sudden, being an amateur at anything was something to be ashamed of. You were expected to be a pro, to be relentlessly competitive in everything you did. So the really crucial point here is how this intense pressure to win completely reshaped what it meant to belong to something. And this leads our narrator to a pretty painful realization. He figures out that the source of all his shame, it isn't just that his team loses all the time. It's about what being their fan says about him in this brand new, hyper-competitive world. He realized that the other kids weren't just mocking the team, they were mocking him because he wore that Sammi Superstars jacket. His so-so, that's his affiliation, the group he belongs to. It branded him as a loser before he even opened his mouth. And as you can imagine, this idea spirals, and pretty soon the entire sports league turns into a kind of social ladder. And this right here, this is the brutal logic of that new pro world. The league standings become a direct metaphor for your entire life. Think about it. If you're a fan of the first-place team, you're aspiring to a life of back-breaking effort and ultimately success. But to root for the Sammi Superstars, well, that meant you were basically accepting a mediocre life. You were choosing to be a nobody. But then, everything shifts. The narrator and his friend come up with this radical new way of looking at things. They completely reframe the team's entire history. Suddenly, it's not a story about failure anymore. It's a story about a conscious, almost philosophical choice. See, the narrator's friend suggests this wild idea that maybe the team had a completely different goal in mind the whole time, a goal that the rest of the world, obsessed with winning, just couldn't see. What if it was never about winning the game on the scoreboard? What if they were trying to win a different, more internal game, a game about character, about finding a kind of peace in the effort itself, win or lose? That was their unique brand of baseball. It wasn't about trying to beat the other team. It was about trying to live by their own code, to play their own game by their own rules. So by refusing to play by society's ruthless, winner-take-all rules, the Sammi Superstars were offering an alternative way to live. Their beautiful, methodical losing, it was a quiet rebellion. A rebellion against that frantic race to the top that was consuming everyone around them. So, at the end of the day, the story of the Sammi Superstars isn't really about a losing baseball team at all, is it? It's a profound challenge to how we define success today. It's urging us to find value in the process, not just the final outcome, to find our dignity somewhere beyond the final score. It's a question that really challenges us to look at our own lives and ask ourselves, what game are we really trying to win? A powerful thought to end on. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.